Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Legitimate Cybersecurity. One of the things that Dustin and I wanted to discuss with everyone today is penetration testing. Something that comes up a lot in the field of cybersecurity, and it's something that when you think about cybersecurity, most people think of, because cyber, they think of hacking, and hacking legally is called penetration testing. Now, there's always been this mythos around hacking and penetration testing, basically that it's really cool and that these hackers can do whatever they want. Now, there's a little bit of truth in the reality of all that. I guess that's backwards. That's all a lie, but there's a little bit of truth in it. Let me put it that way, right? Hacking, what I always like to tell my students when we first start any of our courses, when I'm teaching, is that hacking's illegal by nature. And if you have, in that, if you don't have any permission, it is an illegal activity that you should not do. However, there are companies that will pay for you to actually perform hacking against them. This is called penetration testing. This is a legal form of hacking that companies are, in many situations, are required to do on a regular basis so that they can get things like insurance, so that they can operate safely, and so that they're in compliance with a lot of frameworks that they use. But what we wanted to do today is discuss the reality of it, because there's a lot of misunderstandings. And I want to start, Dustin, by opening up and asking you a couple things. How do you separate the myth of penetration testing, hacking, from the reality of it? And what are these like table stakes that are needed for someone who might be interested in doing it?
Yeah, how to separate the myth from the reality. I do that by actually conducting penetration tests.
By doing the job.
And look, I know I'm not trying to be reductive. I think there's a lot of really great utilities or really great training tools out there, like Hack the Box. Like you can jump on there for free for a couple of the challenges and go through them and see, what it's truly like. And you can kind of get a taste for whether you like it or not. Hacking is on the most visceral levels of networking, computing, security, right? You're looking at shell code. You're looking at assembly code sometimes. Yeah, you're looking at packets. You're looking at the ones and zeros of a packet in order to do this, right? There's very few SOCs out there that currently look at the ones and zeros of a packet.
They'd rather not, in fact.
Yeah, they'd rather just have their tools kind of do it for them. And fine, that's fine. You can do that. But that's the kind of dedication and the kind of love you have to have for the true lower level of computing in order to be a good hacker. Now, not everybody, right? There are certain aspects of hacking and of penetration testing that are for the folks who don't want to be quite as technical. There's social engineering, people who do that all day long. There are people who really enjoy just the network part of penetration testing. There are people who love scripting, who like writing scripts. There are people who love writing shell code and assembly code. There are people who love
nobody likes writing assembly code. Prove it. Prove it.
I will prove it. I will show you those people. But look, it's multifaceted, right? It's not just one size fits all. What I usually see is people who have a bit of irreverence for I don't want to say society, but have an irreverence for
social norms,
social norms, institutions, things like that, because it takes a little bit of that to think outside the box enough to be like, oh, I can go break this thing, make it do something that it wasn't designed to do, and then I have this cool new thing that can do this cool new thing, right? Or I can submit it to a bug bounty program and possibly make 10 grand, or whatever it is.
That's a big possibly too. For those of you who ever take part in a bug bounty program, make sure you have the most important ingredient to all of that, a lawyer. Because there's been more than one instance where I've seen people submit bugs that they've discovered to companies, and then the thing that comes is not payment, but law enforcement.
Yes, cease and desist.
Yep.
But look, so the idea here is that what you really need to do is you need to be in love with computing, and on that almost computer engineer level. You need to have a basic, let's start from scratch here. Let's say that you didn't come from a computer engineering background, which is fine. Most of the greatest penetration testers I've ever worked with have not. Most of them have barely got their high school diploma. Let's put it that way. Worked with some really interesting people, but what they do know is they know how networking works on a visceral level. They know how the operating system functions. They know some basic programming, sometimes some advanced programming. They know cybersecurity fundamentals. They know all of these things that are going to come into play when it comes to looking at an exploit, looking at a vulnerability, looking at something that could potentially be a vulnerability or an exploit, and then designing the exploit around that, right? And so if you're looking to write 0 days, that's one thing, and that's a very advanced thing. But if you're looking to just do some, a remedial or beginning penetration testing, Hack the Box is a great resource for that if you want to try it out without paying. And if you want to pay them, then they have some really good stuff too.
I think it's really fantastic. I like what you said there, because you've got kind of a profile of an individual here, right? Who is intrinsically maybe a little against the grain, a little socially, we'll say a little socially inept.
Could be.
But you kind of, socially diverse. Let's put it that way, because you need a different lens. You need to be at least just a little bit, we'll say a little bit nerdy to do this, right? It doesn't mean you have to be highly educated or you have to have gone through college. In fact, I've got a whole litany of things I could say about college degrees for cybersecurity. Side note,
Me too.
It's really interesting, right, Dustin? How there's very few schools. Did Western Governors, was your undergrad in cybersecurity?
Cybersecurity and information.
It's one of the few schools that actually has an undergraduate degree in cybersecurity. Most schools, if you want to do cybersecurity, it's all at the master's level, which that in and of itself is a problem. But if you look at some of the prep programs for it, they're like, well, how much calculus do you know? And what's your, did you take physics? I'm like, this has nothing to do with cybersecurity. But I've enjoyed as a part of that is a lot of these really great, pen testers and hackers don't have any of that. They're taking the unconventional route. That's not to say that you can take a conventional route and not be a really good hacker. You can. It's just the trend that we're seeing, and you have to be able to code just well enough. Like, you have to be able to at least code badly, right? And I like to use that example because Dustin's seen all my coding, and it's all bad code. But you know what it is? Functional code. So it's functional code which is working, and doing a job.
There's an irony there, by the way, Frank, in that, most exploits are done off of poorly programmed code. So
someone could hack my code that I coded to hack.
There you go.
Hack the hacker. There you go. But being able to at least understand the logic flows of some code and so forth, because then you're able to find like some of the holes that are in it. Oh, Dustin, I bet that's why so much of the vibe coding is so hackable. There's been several articles out there about AI developed code is incredibly hackable, because if you think about it, most code's developed and written already just to be functional. So you've got AI that's learning off of all of that. It's going to make it barely functional and still completely non-secured. I know we talked a little bit about that last time, but there's a whole other thing with that.
And when you talk about SDLC, like secure development lifecycle or software development lifecycle, they're like, okay, go code the thing, and then throw a little sprinkle a little cybersecurity in there. And then go and recode if you need to, but if not, then just go ahead and release it. And for the most part, most organizations are like, just release it because we need a new version now, because we have bug fixes, we have this, we have new functionality we want in there, we have this.
We need to do business.
We don't have time for cybersecurity professionals to review this code and it's a matter. We'll deal with it in the next release, right? I'm sure there's some software developers out there who are like, I've heard that one,
100%. Which kind of then, as we're talking about these capabilities and the way you can become it reminds me then of certifications, right? Now, certifications can be all over the place in general for cybersecurity. We've talked about this more than once. I mean, as individuals who develop certifications, we've got a bit of an insight, right? Specifically with cybersecurity certifications. But one of the things I've noticed is that there are a lot of different options out there for individuals. Case in point, I've got my CEH, my Certified Ethical Hacker, and my LPT, Licensed Penetration Tester certifications, right? And while I enjoyed them, I wouldn't necessarily say they helped me become a better hacker. And that's where I would really like your insight, because you also hire hackers on a regular basis and penetration testers. And the one that sounds like the holy grail is OSCP, right? Offensive Security Certified Professional. And for good reason, with so much of the hands-on. But what's your perspective on these different certifications as it comes to becoming a penetration tester, and how helpful are they?
Yeah, absolutely. We mentioned this already, where you have to have kind of like a good fundamental understanding. The CompTIA certifications are great for that. So if you're looking for Sec, Net Plus, Sec Plus, A plus, that's for like computer repair, but it still teaches you a lot. So A plus, Net plus, Sec plus, and then they do have a pen test plus. I'm not, it's not like an industry thing yet. It's not something that people are like, oh, got to have pen test plus to be able to pen test, right? So like PCI DSS
Right. Right.
Other regulatory bodies require penetration tests, right? And when they do, they're not very prescriptive on how you go about it, but they are kind of prescriptive on like it's got to be a third party and they got to have a certification.
And
And
it's
one of
got to
these
get done.
certifications,
Yeah.
OSCP is one of those certifications every single time. Another one is GPEN, right? And we've talked about SANS before, incredibly expensive, but it is
If you
a
want to overpay for well, I don't want to say overpaying because you do get what you pay for.
you
I will
do,
say
yeah.
that. I mean, once you have a SANS certification, it's pretty
Game over, man.
beyond reproach, right? I know. I think the struggle I still have with it is that they charge $6,000 to $7,000 per boot camp and certification, and then they have this master's program, which I shouldn't put it in quotes. I think it is accredited now, but you're paying $6,000 to $7,000 for like anywhere between 6 to 10 classes, which you can go and get a regular master's for a lot less from a school people have heard of. Right?
That's right.
Not that people haven't heard of SANS, but you have to be in the industry to really be familiar with SANS. I mean, I was in my 30s before I heard of SANS, and take what you will from that, but it's but GPEN is a really good one, I'd say, as well, if you're looking at this.
GPEN, there are some advanced ones from Offensive Security, and then Hack the Box again. They're putting out some really great certifications as well. They're not quite as industry known. However, one of the things you can put on your resume, and one of the things that I might look for when hiring a penetration tester, is they'll have a Hack the Box, basically a profile. So you can go on there and you can see which boxes and which labs they've been able to get through, how many they've been able to get through, how long it took them to get through it. Like a lot of really good kind of metrics there for you to be able to prove like, hey, look, I can do these things. I don't have my OSCP because I didn't want to pay $1,500 or whatever it is, for that class, or, GPEN. I didn't want to pay $8,000 for that class. So, but here's what I've been able to do kind of on my own. And that's impressive, right? That's something that's good. OSCP though, I mean, yeah, that's the industry standard. That's something that's mentioned in most regulations when it comes to you have to have a third party assessment completed. Do they want somebody with OSCP?
How often do you see CEH these days? Because my understanding is in the field, and this isn't just because I have it, it's just in general. When you and I were more active in government contracting, like about a decade or so ago, you'd see CEH plastered on everything, and that it was something that all needed to be had for all the contracts and so forth. But I know that you still do hiring and you see more RFIs and RFPs and so forth. What are you seeing these days as far as the certifications that are most applicable?
I don't see a lot of CEH mentioned for things like regulatory purposes or even RFIs or RFPs. It's usually going to be a more technical certification. So CEH is great in that you're going to learn a lot of the tactics, techniques, and procedures that hackers will use in order to break into, in order to hack into a system or exploit a vulnerability. Some of the labs in the CEH, the really weird thing I remember going through CEH and like they were like, all right, so open up, start up your Windows box and let's start hacking. And I was like,
what? What? Did you just say
my
start
Windows,
up the Windows box?
Yeah, okay. And it's really weird. I don't know if they have like a deal with Microsoft or what it is, and if they do, great for them. But my point is that most hacking doesn't occur on a Windows system. Most hacking occurs truly on a Linux system. And
to give a little bit of context for everyone, it's Linux. It's usually it's Kali, or it's, if you want to use the ancient magic, it's Backtrack, right? And now there is the connection to Offensive Security and Kali. I think they're the ones that maintain it still, right? And
that's right. That's right. So
it's the reason it's the go-to for everything.
Right. CEH, I do feel like if you're more of a senior technologist, it's a good kind of thing to have under your belt, because it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, you get it, you get the methodology behind what's going on here. You could probably read a pen test report and be able to help with remediations. But do you trust somebody with a CEH to go into a system and make sure that they're running the right type of exploit, not going to knock something over, not going to accidentally knock your production server offline? No, I don't think that. I don't see that very often. Again, nothing against CEH. I had my CEH before I made this speech, and I probably am going to get canceled now by EC Council.
I'm going to tell
for saying this.
I'm going to tell the council.
They're gonna come after me. I don't even know
what the EC stands for, an EC Council, and I've had certifications from them for over a decade now.
I'm trying to think of what it is. I have no idea.
I don't know. I'm going to find out. Go ahead. Please continue.
Yeah, you look that up. So formal education is another thing, right? And yes, like you mentioned, Frank, if you're going to do engineering, you're going to have to take calculus, differential EQ, physics 1 and 2, all those kind of prerequisites for an engineering degree, which might help you. in your hacking endeavors. But for the most part, if you get an engineering degree, you're not going to become a hacker because you're going to be engineering new things and making new products and probably making a lot more money that way.
Side note, I know I didn't know this before because it sounds insane. It stands for electronic commerce. The EC and EC Council stands for electronic commerce.
That does sound insane.
In what way does that mean? Hey, you know what? Let's make some certifications. What kind? Hacking, pen testing. Yeah, people need certs for that. Yeah. What should we? Okay, so we got what should we call the place? I don't know. Let's be a council. A council of what? Like commerce? Yeah, but make it sound cooler. We'll add the word electronic in front of it.
So, and this comes into those like kind of retro sounding terminology, right? And we use this a lot. So one thing that always comes to my mind when we talk about something like this, where it's like electronic commerce, it's like, okay, that sounds like what it was called in like 1999 when like they were like, what's Electronic Bay about? You know, oh, it's about electronic commerce, right?
Electronic Bay. That's what we should call eBay from here on out.
That's right.
Electronicbay.com.
Electronic
mail about it, which is also where it came.
Exactly. See, so like we have all these abbreviations for these terms that are now actually just words in the English dictionary.
Yeah.
Where was I going with that? Oh, the word digital. When it's funny. I think when we first started working together here, I think our boss actually was like, I started calling things digital assets, and he was like, that sounds like the 1980s when you say something like that. And I'm like, yeah, but there are physical assets too to an organization, right? You kind of have to look at. So, but I get where that comes from. You know, I like it. It's like if you know the history, it's like you kind of understand. Like, okay, yeah, electronic commerce.
When especially as everything comes together now, right? You're seeing a lot of things drop off. It's not cell phone anymore, right? It's not smartphone anymore. It's just phone,
it's
right?
Just your phone.
So digital assets and physical assets. It's all just assets. I mean, and if one gets compromised or another gets compromised, sometimes it can be just as impactful, right? And arguably, digital assets could be or much more impactful. But you know,
I just call mine magical internet brick.
Yeah, magic internet brick. That's what it is.
That's what a lot of people think it is, but no, there's actually things going on back there that you should probably know about, right?
Yeah, you should know about radio waves, bananas stuff.
Yeah.
So another thing that comes out, and you and I have experienced this before, is the expectations on both sides for penetration testing, right? I distinctly remember when we worked with one company, and this was a long time ago, but we had the two pen testers who successfully identified that the VoIP system, the voice over IP, right, the telephone system was susceptible, and that they could have exploited it and taken the whole thing down. To which the CEO looked at them and said, and this was during the reporting, said, "Nuh-uh." And they said, "What do you mean, nuh-uh?" And he said, "Well, if you could have done it, you would have done it, and you didn't do it, so you can't." And there's, kind of a flabbergasted response there, right? Because one, no one wants the phones to go down. That's how you do business. That's how they were doing business, and it would have cost a great deal of money. But two, also wasn't in the service level agreement, right? The SLA. That they were going to do such actions as would cause crippling business problems for that company. And I think it's really interesting. I'd like you to kind of explain a bit more, right? Where the current state is and what are the lessons you've kind of learned as you've seen people experience pen testing. And is there a typical type of client that has a certain type of expectation? Do they fall into groups? What's that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. And in that same vein, I actually did a pen test for an organization one time, and luckily, we had recorded the session, but we were able to basically change some rules on their firewall without kind of any admin. So we were able to do kind of an escalation of privilege on their firewall. Again, luckily we were recording the session because when we went to them and showed them this finding, they were like, "That's not possible." And so we showed them the recording and they were like, "Well, let's show you now." And they went on there and they couldn't get it to work either. But we got it to work then. And so then there's this interesting thing of like, well, why did it work then? Why doesn't it work now? Did we do an upgrade in the middle? Turns out they did an upgrade in the middle of it. So like it was possible when we started the pen test, but it was a month-long pen test on site. Very, very long endeavor and very tiring endeavor. But yeah, so another important document, just to bring up real quick at the beginning. So you mentioned SLA, ROE, right? Rules of engagement. Really, really important document to have because that's going to set some boundaries when it comes to testing. And we'll get into that in a second. Let's talk about the types of testing, right? So there's you have internal part of your network and you have an external part of your network. Internal versus external. Some people want both. Some organizations want only one versus the other. It really depends on what you want to do. Web application testing, right? That's a whole nother ball of wax. We're actually testing a single web application itself, or maybe multiple, depending on how it's set up. We're testing those applications and the logic behind them, right? How well they're programmed, right? And can we get into the backend database by doing something in the OWASP top 10? There's more to it than OWASP top 10. That's just as an example I like to use for customers, because it's something they can easily go look up and say, oh yeah, here's the 10 top, the top 10 vulnerabilities that are usually within coding of a web application. Social engineering, whether you want that done or not, that's a whole nother ball of wax as well. That's a whole nother function within a penetration test.
How you want that social engineering to happen too?
Yeah, exactly. Phishing, vishing, smishing.
Yeah, exact. There's more, and even physical visits too.
Yep. Absolutely. Physical testing, wireless network testing, right? So whether you
in other words, the best.
That's right. That's the funnest one, right? Proximal access, right?
Personal favorite.
Yep, it's a good one. It's a good one. So, and with all of these, let's talk about expectations a little bit. So when we talk about external penetration testing, we're talking about going against your protective technologies, whatever they are. Very few organizations out there, have a Linux server running from their office that has the ports open and expose the internet. So what you usually have is content delivery networks. You usually have firewalls. You usually have web application firewalls. All kinds of protective technologies that are out there. So depending on what you want to test, you need to make sure that you're thinking about that, right? So if you're an organization, you're like, I want to do an external penetration test to see what a bad guy can do. Great. Do you want to whitelist our IP address to be able to do that? Because if not, then we're basically going against your firewall. And if your firewall's configured properly, guess what? We're not going to be able to find anything. And for some organizations, they're like, that's exactly what we want you to do to make sure that our firewall's set up properly. Great, we can do that, and that's how we're going to do it. And your report is probably going to be very short. And that's okay. That's good for you. However, most customers kind of were like, well, yeah, we want to see if like a bad guy was, trying to hack us for a month, like what they'd be able to get. That's great too. However, we don't have a month. We are with you for a week, maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks or 4 weeks. So then we're up to a month.
Well, they can pay for a month. Although right. Then the understanding is that there's a different level of fund exchange when it goes for that long.
Right. And then we get into the pricing, right? Because everything's going to be priced by the amount of time we're going to spend with you for a penetration test. So that's something else you need to think about, because you might have 10,000 devices that you want pen tested. Can you pay for 10,000 devices to be pen tested? Because we're talking about scanning and enumerating every single one of those devices and services that are on that device. And that's just the first part of pen testing. There's 5 other parts to it, right? Where then we go in, then if we get into, we check for vulnerabilities, we find a vulnerability, we try to exploit it. We try to exploit it for a while sometimes. It depends on the vulnerability. Then if we get in there, what can we find? Can we pivot to another place? Now we're looking at a whole new scope.
How much commerce can you find?
Or electronic bays. How many electronic bays can you find? But look, so that's something you have to keep in mind. And then, what you can really do, and what I always have customers do is I'm like, look, out of those 10,000 assets, how many of them are the exact same configuration? And they're like, well, 9,990 of them are all laptops that are all the exact same configuration. Okay, great. Let's test 2 of those. And then we can give you some really great results that you can apply to all the other 99, whatever I said, 9,990 of them, right? And then the other 10 are servers. Okay, great. Let's test every single one of those because we want to make sure those are safe, right? So thinking about it that way, kind of helping customers conceptualize like, all right, where are my crown jewels, right? That's, a terminology that a lot of people like to use, but it's where are my really important high critical assets? Let's make sure no bad guys can get into those. And then as far as our, golden image or our laptop image goes, let's test out and make sure that we're doing all the right practices there.
That
will significantly reduce the price.
What do you do when they don't know what their assets are? Because you and I have walked into offices before in the past where they don't, I still to this day, I can count on one hand after almost 20 years of cyber, how many companies have had a up-to-date current, legitimate net map that shows all their assets and that they have a comprehensive understanding of it. Because I feel like so many companies don't even know what they have. And not to knock it. Again, business dictates, the speed of cyber and stuff like that. But the idea of not knowing what assets are in your area of responsibility, what assets you have, horrifying to me.
Yes. So scary. And so many CISOs have to put up with that because they come into a situation where they weren't there at the beginning. And now all of a sudden it's like, where's the documentation for this? And I'm like, I don't know. You have these directors and these managers who are like, I don't know, I wasn't here when that was set up either. So we're starting to see folks coming into organizations, and because digital assets have been around for so long, that they weren't there for the digital transformation that happened, so they don't know where everything is. So how do you find everything? Good question. You need to have good asset management happening already.
You really do.
You need to probably have some kind of vulnerability management going on. If you're not doing either one of those things, you are not prepared for a penetration test. And if you still want to go forward with it, you're not going to like the 800-page report that you're going to get. Because basically what we're going to be doing at that point is asset discovery, vulnerability scanning, and then reporting on those vulnerabilities. We'll probably have to make 1 or 2 hops before we get into your Active Directory or into some other, really high critical asset that you have on your network. And then, that's basically end X for us. We're like, all right, well, we got everything we needed here because we can basically pivot into the CEO's computer, access ACH numbers, transfer money from your bank account. We have these finance reports that we were able to rip off of this computer, et cetera, et cetera. So asset management's important. You need to make sure that you know what you have. Pen testing should not be used as a way to find assets that you don't know about. If we find an asset that you don't know about, shadow IT or otherwise.
IT, which, by the way, you and I have been accused of in the past.
Yes, we sure have. Even though the CTO was there during the discussion, we got
right.
That's right.
Just because you didn't know it was there and you don't like it doesn't mean it's necessarily shadow IT, especially when someone can show you physical receipts and approvals of purchase
and emails.
Yep.
So it's good times. But yeah, so that's an important, it's a really good question, Frank, and something that we get a lot of because, another part of our job is vulnerability management, right? And making sure that companies are secure. And so when a company comes in, it's like, we don't really know what we have. Look, when it comes to vulnerability management, we can help a little bit with that, right? We can say, okay, we can run scans and we can do some passive and active scanning on your network to see what's on there. And we can help you identify devices, but it's really up to you to make sure that we know what those devices are and how important they are to your organization. And that's just the first.
And I like that you bring that up too, because vulnerability management, I feel like, so risk registers in general can look so many different ways, but I feel like when you have vulnerability management and you do these scans and so forth, which can be part of a pen test and so forth, it's almost like there's this great register and they're like, put it in the great register of vulnerabilities and things I need to get to someday, right? Like that's what it sounds like. They then put it on the list and they'll take care of, ideally, I've seen people take, months to just take care of the critical vulnerabilities that are identified, let alone the highs. And then it feels like, oh, well, those medium and low vulnerabilities, that's just our padding. That's just like our nesting that we have around here to keep us, warm at night. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that's, even when you find these things and you put up these excellent reports, why do they take forever to address these things? And what are the big roadblocks? Anyway, continue. Sorry, I feel like I just whispered the answer in your ear.
Remediations are scary. The vastness of what they can mean is scary. Meaning that, let's say we found a critical vulnerability on on an organization's production server that has been a production server for 20 years, and the guy who programmed it died, and nobody remembers how.
No one remembers Cobalt.
And no one remembers Cobalt, right? That's a very real thing that happens on a regular basis. We run into organizations all the time that have these legacy systems running. There is still Windows XP and Windows 7 boxes that are on really important infrastructure networks. Let me just put it that way. And it's scary. However, what you're looking at then is a cost-benefit analysis. So you're looking at, is it worth paying to have somebody new come in and reprogram this and have like a massive 12-month project, or do we put protective technologies around it and do defense in depth? Right. So look, you can remediate 100 different ways, but the vastness of remediation. So we work with organizations day in and day out. Some of these organizations have 10,000 vulnerabilities on 1,000 assets. Do the math there. But look, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're incredibly vulnerable. Yeah, no, we're not doing the math.
This is not a math show.
That doesn't mean that they're... We got to ask ChatGPT. We'll do that later.
It's bad at math though too, last I checked. But let us get away. Continue.
Yeah, we'll talk about AI later. But yeah, so I think that's it. It's the remediation, and this happens with vulnerabilities too, and also the scariness of when you do a pen test, you're actually you're actually exploiting those vulnerabilities and seeing what bad things could happen. It's all been theoretical up until this point, right? So you're looking at your vulnerability report and you're like, ooh, yeah, that's a bad CVE. It's a 9.7. Let's do something. Our CVSS score, it's a 9.7. Let's do something about that. And then, you know, you do something about it or you don't, or you forget about it and you have to go to do something else because you're a very busy person, because you're the only person who's doing cybersecurity in the organization. Anyway, let's just say I've seen this a lot. And but then when you see it and you're like, oh my gosh, the pen tester came in here, he broke into that vulnerability that we knew about. He was able to pivot into a different part of our network. He was able to get into our Active Directory, and then he or she was able to get into our CEO's email. That's scary. When you look at something that way and you see an attack path and you see how things were actually able to go down. I'm reminded of there was a Facebook hack that happened not too long ago where they had to jump through 3 different systems and use 3 different very specific exploits and very different exploits in order to get to the crown jewels, what they got to. That really shocked a lot of people, and they were like, what? These aren't even connected systems, or, you know, oh, these were so different. How did they know? Because they spent a really long time on the network undetected, and they were able to pivot through those systems and find those different vulnerabilities and exploits, right? So I think that's it. I think it's just very scary when you see how intricate and how incredibly intelligent hackers are, and these security.
How much time they have.
And how much time and how much maybe funding they might have, depending on if you're dealing with an APT or depending on if you're dealing with you know, just a criminal group that has a lot of funding because they run a lot of ransomware attacks. So look, either way, you know, we see this every day where the criminal element here is getting more and more organized, and they're getting more and more business-like. Like, you have a group who's really good at getting footholds. So that's what they do. Then they sell that access to the group that's really good at pivoting and escalation. Then those people take it and they, you know, whatever access
very
they
bespoke. Get. Some might say artisanal hacking. If you will.
And they give it to the people who are good at ransomware stuff. And then the ransomware people use those exploits and those vulnerabilities and those accesses that were gained in order to run their ransomware thing. Then they make however much money they make off of it. And it's a business. There are like help hotlines you can call to be like, hey, the thing didn't work that you sold me. And they're like, oh, so sorry about that, sir. Let's find out what's going on here. You know, it's like this amazing, really strange world of business, of illegal or illicit business that's going on. That's modeled after what we do. You know, it's very interesting.
It's kind of remarkable in that way. I like, one of the things you mentioned is finding some Windows 7 systems, and I know that they're still finding Windows 98 systems, but the one I'm super curious about, how much Vista you see out there? But like, let's talk about the bastard of you know, Windows OS.
And not only that, but Vista was kind of created because they took DOS away, right? So what the original Windows 98 and before were kind of
like
built
Vista
off
was created for no good reason almost. But please continue.
Oh, I guess, you know what, I might be thinking of Windows ME, Millennial Edition. That might have been it. Vista, I think, was the first really try to push everybody into NT, Windows NT, which is the Windows new technology, which is what everything's based off of now. So it's not DOS based.
All I remember is they really insist I use some glass icons.
Yeah, Vista was all about the sleek
really
look, right? Interesting stuff. Windows 10, 8 was just complete. We can go off on that.
And then they're like, let's try this. Whoops.
Yeah, so you know, I think MS-DOS systems are still actually out there. We don't see them too often, but every once in a while they'll pop up on a test, and we'll be like, "Holy shit, what is this?"
Yeah,
like, we just want to know. Like,
someone needs to either turn this off or hide it better.
We're not even mad. We're actually impressed. This thing is still running. What do you guys? Are you guys running this on a? Are you running this on a 486? Like, what? How do you? You know, or a 286? Because you could run that. We could run DOS on a 286 with like 16 kilobytes of RAM. But anyway, it's a really interesting. It's really interesting to find those older
watch these days. Holy cow! Sorry. Separately.
But and you know, now it's funny because we make we're kind of making fun of this, and we're making fun of Microsoft and Windows. But to be honest, when it comes to IoT devices and Linux, let's talk about some old Linux kernels that are running old devices. Yeah, like MS-DOS era, you know, Linux kernels that are running on these really old legacy hardware, because it's like, you know, the manufacturers are like
data systems.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing to see these things, and honestly, you know, I think you can hear the enthusiasm in my voice about finding these old legacy, really scary systems, and that's the level of dedication and love you have to have for penetration testing.
You're a treasure hunter. That's what you are, Dustin. You're looking
a digital treasure hunter.
Oh, digital archaeologist. There you go.
An electronic archaeologist.
All of this sounds better then Electronic Commerce Council. All of it. You could have all these options.
Lord.
I have a working theory here, right? That people wouldn't like cybersecurity or think it's so cool if it didn't have the word cyber in it. And I don't know what marketing or branding genius out there, but was like, no, we can't call this information technology security. No, that doesn't sound cool. And then people won't want to do it. Which, by the way, even being called cybersecurity, we still don't have enough people, and there's still a dramatic need for bodies. But whoever out there said no, cyber really did us all a favor. We've made whole careers off of this that I just completely believe would not exist. Like, we'd still be IT technicians.
And we'd be network security.
Eating garbage.
Maybe information security still. That's been around forever.
Yeah, information security's been around since like they had safes. Cool, right?
But look, marketing for this kind of stuff has gotten sexier. And I always go back to like Heartbleed, Spectre, and Meltdown. They had icons, right? They had these like Spectre had a ghost, and Heartbleed had like a bleeding heart with like a knife in it and stuff like that. And that's what kind of caught executive attention. And they were like, oh, we need to pay attention to this Heartbleed thing, don't we? And it's like, okay, how many SSH boxes do we have out there? That's not something that an executive is going to ask, but they're going to say like,
didn't the I love you worm or I love you bug even have like a ladybug on it or something like that from back in the day, like 2000?
Like an ASCII art,
because I helped introduce that on accident to my college system. Thanks, LimeWire. Maybe it was Kazaa, I don't know, but I remember all of a sudden being like, ooh, this shouldn't be doing this at all.
This goes back to
I just wanted to listen to Creed. Right?
Wasn't this on our last episode? We were like, we're experts cybersecurity, but we sometimes click on the damn links.
Still, and it's so much worse because more than 9 times out of 10, we don't click anything. But every now and then one gets you, and as soon as somebody knows, it's no end of.
You get razzed for sure.
But let that be. Everyone makes mistakes. Even cyber professionals still click the link. But yeah, right. Well, thank you, Dustin.
Yeah, humans being the weakest link, right?
Yeah. I think this has been good a lot. I have one more question for you. Anyone who's interested in the field of pen testing, if you had to give, let's put it in because we've talked a lot about it, in just one concise do this. What do you think they'd have to do? Like, say I am coming out of high school, I want to be a hacker when I grow up. What can guarantee me there's no guarantees in life, but what's the closest you can guarantee? Like, do this, then this, then this, then this. You stand a shot.
Work your way up to OSCP for sure. Make sure, I don't know if if you're a younger person and you're listening to this and you hear me and Frank being so like geeking out on this stuff and getting really excited about talking about it. Make sure you have that level of drive and that level of love for looking at ones and zeros. And I'm not being hyperbolic. I'm literally saying you got to love looking at binary.
And hex. I mean, okay. Or hex.
Look.
You can open up Wireshark.
Binary goes into hex, which goes into ASCII sometimes, which, or whatever country you're listening to.
You have to get excited about it, though. There has to be intriguing to you. You have to be interested. It's like you hear all these people become dentists, but they don't like teeth. And then everyone wonders why there's a high suicide rate amongst dentists. It's because they don't like teeth. You don't get into it because you think it's cool or that there might be money there. You have to actually like this stuff. Right.
Yes. Love it. Have it drive you and have a natural curiosity. If you're somebody who there's plenty of other jobs in cybersecurity. If you still want to get into cybersecurity and you're still interested in pen testing, but you're like, ooh, yeah, that doesn't sound good to me. There are a million other jobs out there that are within cybersecurity.
Take a look at CyberSeek. CyberSeek is a good website for that, where you can create your own career with that to see other options as well. Sorry to interrupt you. Please continue.
No, that's okay. And as someone who doesn't have their OSCP, by the way, I feel like I should say that. I am telling you to go get your OSCP. I went through a very different path. I went through a very different path to get to where I am, and it's a harder path than getting your OSCP.
David or Dustin, I took the weird way. Let me honest.
Yeah, we went through DoD channels and kind of fell into it a little bit, right? That's another option. Hey, you can join the military and you can do cyber defense for for our nation. That's another option that you have to go through. You'll have to go through very similar courses to OSCP, just in a different function that you will never be able to talk about. Or you can take OSCP, show everybody your credential, and get hired for much more money from a private organization.
Or you can go to a career fair one day and find the NSA desk and wonder why people are taking a weird interest in you. Because that's
right.
But that's a story for another podcast.
That's a story for another podcast. Yeah. But look, yes, there's those paths that you can take. If you want to be a public servant and you want to get into cybersecurity, that's a great path to take. Go into the military.
Lifetime healthcare.
Go into the DoD, absolutely. Like those are, DHS. There's a lot of really great government organizations out there. As we've spoken about though recently, they're not in the mood for hiring right now. So maybe go for your OSCP.
Considering what the Supreme Court just permitted. So
yeah, so not only not in the mood for hiring, but not really in the mood for scientific exploration. So maybe
craft here, Dustin. Science is if I need science, I'll go to a wizard. Thank you.
And this is how to alienate 50% of our listening.
Yeah, well, yeah, we're going to lose no matter what. There's no winning. Welcome to the timeline where you can't win. You can just suffer. Anyway, and with that, thanks for tuning in. Like and subscribe. Click those notification bells. We are on. Also, we're going to, and we'll put it in the show notes or wherever. I don't know. Maybe we're up in a competition coming up for podcasting and so forth. Dustin's got the link. We're going to put that out there. Vote for us or vote for someone else. I still don't even know what this is. It's probably just my midlife crisis. Anyway, but either way, like, subscribe, click notifications, and do whatever you do with podcasts. Until our next episode, thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you later.
Yeah, everybody, thanks for listening into Frank's Midlife Crisis podcast.
Dustin's stuck with me.